Hello, my name is Dirk Voeste. I'm the head of the Regulatory, Sustainability and Public Affairs Department of BASF Agricultural Solutions. And today is a topic about biodiversity and what we call the better yield. We know from the IPC report in February that climate change crisis is really accelerating. We know that there is a link between climate change and biodiversity losses, and certainly, I think, adverse effects of human development. We know this from all areas. So, what does it have to do, you may ask, with agriculture? We all need food. We all need food tomorrow and today. And of course, with the current crisis and the human catastrophes, which are triggered and become more obvious, that food is really needed. And it's really important for all of us. You see food prices rising. You're seeing that demands, for example, in the countries of the global south, may not be fulfilled in today's and even tomorrow's world. And we should also remember the very thin layer of grain inventories we do have. Roughly 120 to 140 days is the inventory for wheat, for example, which means if we wouldn't harvest today, it would last about 3 to 4 months globally. So there is the need to really produce on one side more, but on the other hand, it's very important that we keep the natural habitats in place and even restore them, because we know they are super important for agriculture, for the productivity, and certainly for the climate. So how do we now look at this transformation ahead of us, the transformation of agriculture? It will massively increase, it will massively accelerate, and it will go into digitalization, innovation. We're looking at soil health, we're looking at biodiversity, we're looking at productivity as such. And how do we cope with it? It seems like we need to square a circle. And I think it's important that we're realizing that through innovation, for example, like from BASF, but also through digitalization, to agricultural practices, to a more also very important things, fostering biodiversity, we will see that those can really be balanced. It is not one size fits all. It is about the real and fine balance of moving and taking all available technologies into the right area. And today I would like to give you a more sense of why is biodiversity at the core of it. We talked about this. If you want to produce more, if we want to produce more, and we need to produce more to feed the many people on the planet today and in the future, the 3 billion people who may come in the next, whatever, 2 decades is, we need land. And land is currently one of the most precious items. We're seeing, for example, in Germany, we are losing between 60 and 70 hectares per day on on cities, on streets, and all these topics. We're seeing that climate change has a massive impact on the way how we can use land and how we have really secure and stable yield. We're seeing pests and diseases, of course, getting there. We need access to water, and certainly we're observing desertification, soil deterioration all over the places. So the imperative ask for all of us is, if we need to translate the agri-food system, is we have to do it within the planetary boundaries. This is really key. On one side, as I said, we need innovation, we need new solutions, but we need something what we call the better yield. And you may ask yourself now, what is it, a better yield? There is yield, and what does it mean is a better yield? A better yield is a yield which we would describe, which is in the planetary boundaries, but respects biodiversity. It improves the yield with a lower environmental impact. It has less carbon, less carbon to be used per protein or per tons harvested. Food waste, all these topics around it, saying how can we, let's say, improve what we have and really reducing the footprint of what we are harvesting. That is the better yield. And as said, it is a balance between various factors which need to take into consideration, be it the local diets or be it very local conditions, how we produce, different soil types, different environments, different climate conditions, and so on and so on and so on. So this is about the better yield concept. So how does this translate now into a little bit more concrete examples? First of all, it is less CO2 per ton of protein or carbon to be produced, for example, through no-tilling practices, but also to cover crops in other areas. Through digitalization, it really, really is important that we have a climate resilient agriculture, but also with the amount of CO2 released by agricultural practices worldwide, it is important that we're reducing CO2 per ton of grain harvested or protein produced. Biodiversity, super important. And you here see, for example, and I will go this into more detail, is saying how we can really make biodiversity not only, let's say, part of the agricultural practices, but how we can also make it part of the value stream which we're generating. Reduce food waste, the third one, is key of importance. And here breeding, for example, plays a role. Can we breed, for example, watermelons and others which are fitting to the new household system, at least in the Western society, where we need smaller portions to eat so that this food isn't wasted? And of course, we can go into packaging and logistic and cooling at this point in time. But from an agricultural perspective, also here, there are unique opportunities to reduce food waste and certainly linked to a business opportunity. And of course, we talked about this. It is not only to produce more but better, but certainly we need higher and very important, more stable yield. Yes, we need crop protection, we need different varieties, we may even need to think and talk about genome editing and other modern breeding technologies to provide this yield and the stable yield under certain changing environmental conditions to really feed the world on this the people on this planet. So now the question is that's all fine, but what kind of targets should somebody set? And we at BASF have selected 4 commitments which we believe are important to accelerate agriculture. And other companies may look at it differently, but I think it's important that companies, institutions, countries set themselves targets, or as we call it, commitments, because we are committed to deliver technology, we call it under climate smart farming, to reduce the CO2 per ton of crop produced by 30%. We commit that we annually increase the share of new technologies to be released, and this can be crop protection, seeds, trades, digitalization, and others by 7% annually. We have a systematic tool for that. It's called Sustainable Solution Steering. Happy to provide you with more details if you require. It's really a systematic and ingrained structured and validated methodology, how we steer our portfolio from R&D to the final product on a year-to-year basis. And we commit that we will have more than 400 million hectares supported by digital farming, a proxy for sustainability, because you have less overdrives, much more targeted application of resources, and at the end of the day, you're reducing the environmental footprint, and certainly I think, which is also key and important, to increase the profitability of farming. Because if you look at farming, it is really something which is core for us, essential for us, because we need the food. On the other hand, I think it has to be run profitable, because if farmers don't invest in new technologies, don't invest into their assets like soil and others, of course, we will face a long-term problem. And certainly our 4th commitment is smart stewardship, is a safe application of all our technologies. I think this is important to, of course, have striving for 0 farming incidences. Human health and environment are key. So 4 clear commitments to drive the portfolio, to really, let's say, look into what can we deliver to reduce the footprint of the production, to obtain the better yield. And this comes, of course, with a variety of different examples. And I would like to guide you now through a few of them. 4. First of all, learn from best practices. There is a farm network which we have established in Europe, more than 50 farms independently. They form a network together with society, academia, and with BASF, and where farmers exchanging best practices to learn what they can do to deliver the better yield. How does modern farming go hand in hand with the environment? How is modern farming going hand in hand with the transformation we need in agriculture and the transformation we need in the food and feed value chain? And you can see it, and here it's pictured like a way. It's kind of an open classroom. A lot of stakeholder dialogues, school classes, politicians, interested people, neighbors are coming to the farm to learn what you do and what we could do in terms of increasing and fostering biodiversity and linking those modern farm practices in a day-to-day operation of the farmers. So first of all, it is farm network, bringing people together, learn from each other, also from our mistakes to make it better and really driving it. Because at the end, it is very, very clear. Nobody can do it alone. Nobody can tackle the challenge alone. It is really about partnerships, networks to really get it done, farm to farm, but also within the egg and food and feed industry, partnering with the value chain to get it done and drive it in order to achieve these very, very ambitious targets. Lark Loaf, I just mentioned, it's a project in Germany where we are fostering biodiversity and increasing farm profitability. And you may ask yourself the question, so biodiversity, does it come with profitability? The picture is the following. There are so-called lark windows, and you see them here in the picture. This is where the skylark, the bird, it needs it a little bit as a runway so that they can at the end nest in the field. There you see through digitalization, we left those fields without any wheat. So there is some biodiversity around it, but for more openness, the larks can start and land from this space. So they have the space which they need to nest and breed. If we harvest the wheat from this field, we call it lark wheat. This wheat is then processed in a mill on an IP processing, and then a baker here is taking up this specific bread and bakes the lark loaf or the lark bread. And consumers buying the bread are willing to pay a few cents more to foster and support biodiversity, to support the larks nesting in the field as a proxy for biodiversity. This value then is distributed, of course, to the bakery, to the miller, and in most parts to the farmers. So farmers the first time increased profitability, even though they harvested less tonnage of wheat per acre. It's an interesting model to say biodiversity becomes a value driver for farming. And certainly it's very, very important. It's not only about the lark windows. Farmers have to establish other biodiversity measures. You know this, flower strips, hedges, etc., because it's not only about the bird, it is about the ecosystems which are connected and have to be connected to have the full potential of biodiversity and the ecosystem value. We can even say we are farming biodiversity. The next example brings us to Brazil. We call it the Mataviva project. So it's not only about farming best practices, but also delivering and looking at the surrounding of farms. With a foundation, it's called Foundation Espaço Eco, we have meanwhile planted more than 1 million trees. So 700 hectares of forest, which is important because I think farmers show not only in, let's say, growing trees and let's say also bringing biodiversity closer to their fields, it shows that, you know, the whole project helps them to market their products. We will train them in agricultural practices, but also demonstrating, yes, we are consequently building up biodiversity in this regard through trees which are sitting there, of course, having a positive impact on the climate, but certainly I think very, very important in the local communities, on the farm areas, to really say, yes, we grow and bring sustainability closer to the farmland, to restore part of it, and also, of course, and you see it in the headline, improving the water quality, because it's very often done near rivers and water fountains. It's conserving the soil with the forest, and certainly I think preserving the vegetation and wildlife in this area. So another very local idea. And the fourth one is also in a Latin American example, and it brings us to Mexico. And it brings us to Mexico in coffee production. And here, together with the UNESCO, we set up a project of producing, let's say, providing those farmers and learning them with integrated pest management practices. We help them to see what needs to be done on a very, let's say, local area to improve their yield in coffee. And at the end, from this exercise, we're seeing that they're not only having a higher yield, and here 16% I mentioned, they also can achieve a higher price for their coffee, because it's a completely different brand. We're having different value streams, how we sell it. And important learning here are twofold. One is, again, biodiversity is very local, and you have to see it in the local context. You have to respect cultural differences and diversity, and also the ethnic in the community. Again, one size doesn't fit all. But what you're seeing is a triangle. On one side, you have the farmer. On the other hand, you need to create a sustainable business, robust and certainly future oriented. And you need individual partners, and that can be the UNESCO on one side. It can be the Fundação Espaço Eco in Brazil. It can be a network between a miller and a bakery in the Lark Loaf example. Or it can be when you have the network of farms, other farmers, which helps you. It is always a triangle of saying, how can we really create a solid network or connection between farming, business to be made for all parties, and certainly also partnerships around that. And I think this is driving the agricultural transformation, but this is also very important because this is part of how we foster biodiversity. And here you see 4 parts, and I'm summarizing my key takeaways. It's about fostering or even farming biodiversity. It is about the right innovations to really, let's say, drive the transformation of the agri-food system to achieve the better yield. It is key, and this is really key, to develop best practices, jointly share them. It is about the partnership to drive this transformation. Alone, it is impossible to be made. So there is no silver bullet, and there is no one size fits all. It is really about finding the unique solution. It makes things much more complex, maybe as we used to it in the past. But there is the level of uncertainty in the future, and it only can be captured if we are local, understand the local conditions, and derive technologies and implement and explore technologies which drives the local biodiversity part. Because biodiversity is one of the key essential elements to, let's say, drive the food and system transformation. We need to safeguard biodiversity in order to have a climate resilient farming. We need to safeguard and grow biodiversity because we need to support the global food security topic. And we all know this decade from the United Nations is the decade of exploring ecosystem restoration. So biodiversity is an imperative and major part, the key driver, one of the key drivers for the agricultural food transformation. And with this one, I would like to close. I would really like to thank you. And again, please don't forget, it's not only about biodiversity, it's about farming biodiversity. Take it really serious into farm practices. It is not just a small little niche opportunity or niche example here. It's about the network, it's about the partnership. And with this one, I would like to thank you and wish you a good conference and a good discussion.